Hey folks, Matt Karen here. Today we're going to recap everything you need to know about Dune Part 1. With Dune Part 2 coming to theaters soon, it may have been a while since you last watched Part 1, unless you're like me and have had it on constant loop in the background for the past few years. So if you need a refresher or want to know some of the more finer plot points and lore of Dune, then I've got all of the spicy little details for you so you don't need prescient vision before going into Part 2. First, a heads up, Nerdist's own Padishah Emperor is Legendary Entertainment, which produces Dune, but I read Dune way before Legendary even existed, so I've been a Duneatic my entire life. In fact, this is my first copy of Dune from my childhood, and you can see that I clearly read it so many times it fell apart. So I'd be talking about Dune regardless. I'm a big fan. This video is just a fun excuse for me to rewatch Part 1, so fine, I'll watch it again, I guess. Now, fair warning, I'll also dip a bit into the lore from the book to help give some extra background information on what we do see in the movie. I'll have Thufir pop up here as a warning if I start getting too much into spoiler territory from the novel, and where you can skip ahead if you just want to hear me explain what you need to know from only the movie. If you're a quick reader and still want to get a chance to get caught up in the book, up to where Dune Part 2 will begin, you can read a little bit past halfway up to the chapter that begins with God created Arrakis to train the faithful. And another fair warning, if you read the book, you'll also discover a few important details that haven't been revealed yet, but we should hopefully see answered in the second movie. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive in to make sure you have everything you need to know before seeing Dune Part 2.
This is only the beginning.
First things first, let's actually address some deep lore from the book to help explain Dune's setting. Skip here if you want to get straight into the movie explainer. Dune takes place roughly 20,000 years into the future, where humans have spread to countless worlds throughout the known universe, and Earth is pretty much a myth. By their calendar, it is the year 10,191 AG, or after Guild. 10,000 years before Dune, humans revolted against thinking machines, so by the time that this story takes place, this is a universe without computers or advanced technology. Great schools and guilds were created to enhance humans and fill the void left by machines. For instance, Mentats are humans who can process massive calculations and projections. The Spacing Guild holds a monopoly on space travel. And the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood trains women in the ways of politics, mental acuity, the martial arts, among many other things. Civilization itself has reverted back to a feudalistic society, with many noble houses ruled over by an emperor. But the Imperium wouldn't function without the most important resource in the known universe, the spice melange. Spice extends life, it grants limited prescience, and it's used by the navigators of the Spacing Guild to chart safe pathways for their ships. Dune Part 1 begins on the planet Arrakis, also known as Dune. We first hear the voice of Chani, played by Zendaya. Chani is one of the Fremen, the indigenous people of Arrakis who live in the vast desert wastelands of the planet. We also see spice drifting across the desert plains. The spice melange is the most valuable substance in the universe and only comes from one place, Arrakis itself. The Harkonnens, a ruthless and brutal family—
They're brutal!
Yes, thank you, Gurney. A ruthless and brutal family have been the ruling governors of Arrakis, a position granted to them by the Emperor. The Harkonnens have plundered the planet and harvested spice for the Imperium for the last 80 years, all while battling the Fremen. And, as we'll find out a little later, the Harkonnens' governorship actually ends and they depart from Arrakis, leaving Chani to wonder if their replacements will be just as bad, if not worse.
Why did the Emperor choose this path? And who will our next oppressors be? Oh my God.
We next meet Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet. Paul is the heir of the Atreides family, the son of Duke Leto Atreides, played by Oscar Isaac, and the Duke's concubine, the Lady Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson. Paul wakes from a dream of visions of Arrakis, and hey, Chani is there too, remember her?
Paul.
On his home planet of Caladan, Paul eats breakfast with his mother as she tests him. Jessica is a sister of the Bene Gesserit and instructs him to use the voice. The voice is a special ability that can compel someone to do whatever a Bene Gesserit sister commands them to. Think of it like a Jedi mind trick, because in actuality, the Jedi were inspired by the Bene Gesserit.
Credits will do fine.
No, they won't.
Credits will do fine.
Almost.
As Paul tries to use the voice, we see a few quick shots of a portrait of Paul's grandfather, the Old Duke, and a statue of a bullfighter. The Old Duke was gored during a bullfight, and we see this statue and the bull's head as a motif throughout the book and the movie. It represents the audacity of the Atreides family, that their hubris can get the best of them whenever they challenge danger.
And grandfather fought bulls for sport.
Yes. Look where that got him.
House Atreides awaits the arrival of the Emperor's Herald of the Change. The Emperor has charged House Atreides with the new governorship of Arrakis. Their archenemies, House Harkonnen, will no longer be in charge of harvesting spice.
How can the Emperor Take everything we built and give it to that Duke! How?
One would think this would be a great honor to be responsible for the most precious resource in the universe. However, everybody involved, the Emperor, House Harkonnen, and even House Atreides, they all know it's a trap.
When is a gift not a gift?
Duke Leto explains to Paul that the Emperor feels threatened by the popularity of House Atreides.
The great houses look to us for leadership, and this threatens the Emperor.
And, as we all know, it's not always a good thing to look better than your boss. Leto tells Paul that by taking Arrakis away from the Harkonnens, the Emperor is actually stoking a war between the two houses, thereby weakening both of them. But Leto believes he can rely on an alliance with the Fremen to help defend against any type of Harkonnen attack.
Here on Caladan, we've ruled by air power and sea power. On Arrakis, we need to cultivate desert power.
We then catch up with Paul during his weapons training and shield practice with Gurney Halleck.
Oh, man.
Gurney is the War Master for House Atreides. He's a troubadour warrior who is equally skilled with a blade as he is with a ballast set, which we will hopefully see in part 2. Normally, Paul's friend Duncan Idaho, a Ginaz swordmaster, would be training Paul, but Duncan has been sent on an advanced mission to Arrakis to hopefully forge an alliance with the Fremen.
Desert power.
During shield practice, Gurney reminds Paul that the slow blade penetrates the shield. In the Duneverse, some of the same technology that allows for hyperspace travel also generates the power for body shields, known as the Holtzman effect. Any object that encounters a shield at too high of a speed is deflected. It takes a skilled hand with a blade to strike with the right speed to slide through the shield and hit the opponent within. These shields also have a very volatile reaction to laser weapons. If a lasgun fires at a shield, it creates a feedback loop, which leads to a nuclear explosion, hence the return to sword combat and melee attacks in the world of Dune. House Harkonnen, the arch-enemies of House Atreides, hail from Gedi Prime, a dark, polluted, industrial world where the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen rules with an oppressive hand.
Brutal!
Baron Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, explains to his nephew, the Beast Raban, played by Dave Bautista, how the Harkonnens will actually finally destroy the Atreides. Now that the Emperor has stoked a war between the two enemy houses, he'll supply House Harkonnen with reinforcements from his Sardaukar army. The Sardaukar are the Emperor's elite shock troops, and not only are they the most feared soldiers in the Imperium, but they're really good at throat singing. Here we see the Baron, who is so overweight he must rely on the aid of suspensors to help lift his bulk. The Harkonnens represent ultimate indulgence and gluttony as they have become extremely wealthy from their governorship of Arrakis. Before House Atreides leaves for Arrakis, the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood visits them on Caladan. For thousands of years, the Bene Gesserit have been selectively breeding certain bloodlines to produce a human who can see through all of space and time. They call this the Kwisatz Haderach.
Kwisatz Haderach.
The Lady Jessica is actually a part of that breeding program, and she was ordered to give birth to a daughter, but out of her love for Duke Leto, she decided to give him an heir with a son.
So much potential wasted in a male.
Paul, therefore, may have abilities that he cannot control. The Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, played by Charlotte Rampling, has come to test Paul to ensure that he is actually not a danger to the Bene Gesserit's plans. Paul is subjected to intense pain, which he must withstand, or else the Reverend Mother will kill him with a poisoned needle, the Gam Jabbar. The pain activates visions from his dreams, but fortunately, he passes the test.
What did you see?
Girl.
When he later overhears the Reverend Mother scolding Jessica, Paul realizes he may in fact actually be this Kwisatz Haderach.
That I could be the one.
So, in order to protect his bloodline, the Bene Gesserit have prepared safety measures on Arrakis by spreading false religions and prophecies that Paul could be a promised Messiah. Therefore, no one will harm him. House Atreides finally arrives on Arrakis. Their massive lighters and frigates slowly emerge from the even more massive Spacing Guild Highliner in orbit around the planet. As the most metal bagpipe player you've ever heard leads the Atreides out onto the landing field, Paul and Jessica hear many of the Fremen pilgrims chanting, Lisan al-Gaib, Lisan al-Gaib. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood has prepared safety measures for any sister who may come to a dangerous planet such as Arrakis. The Missionaria Protectiva is the Bene Gesserit's method of spreading the myths and superstitions of false religions with which a Bene Gesserit sister could use to manipulate an entire population.
Planting superstition.
And this Lisan al-Gaib is a prophesized voice from the outer world. The Fremen believe that a Bene Gesserit sister who has borne a son will come to Arrakis, and that son will be their prophet.
You see what they've been told to see.
We even see this Missionaria Protectiva take effect again later when Jessica meets a Fremen servant, the Shadout Mapes.
When you have lived with prophecy for so long, the moment of revelation is a shock.
In the Arakeen Keep, Paul adjusts to his new life on Arrakis, but the Harkonnens have left plenty of sabotage devices and traps for the Atreides. Fortunately, Paul survives an assassination attempt from a Hunter Seeker. It's a little remote-controlled drone with a poison needle tip. Thufir Hawat, the Mentat and Master of Assassins for House Atreides, feels ashamed at not detecting the danger and failing to protect his young master. Now in the book, many noble houses participate in wars of assassins instead of outright warfare. Sending an entire army to another planet can cost a house a lot of spice. The Spacing Guild charges more fees than a Grubhub delivery order.
How much will it cost them?
3 guild navigators, a total of 1.46 million, 62 salaries round trip.
Many nobles instead turn to assassins who use poisons and silent weaponry, like Hunter Seekers, to eliminate precise targets and to avoid the mess of war and combat. Back on Gadi Prime, the Reverend Mother Mohiam negotiates with Baron Harkonnen. Mohiam is aware of the plan that the Harkonnens have with the Emperor, but insists that when the Harkonnens destroy the Atreides, they should allow Paul and Jessica to escape. Paul's genetics are way too important to lose for the Bene Gesserit's breeding program.
On that matter, Duke Leto Atreides means nothing to our order.
Now, in the book, Baron Harkonnen also promises not to kill Paul and Jessica, at least not directly. Reverend Mother Mohiam is the Emperor's truthsayer, a Bene Gesserit sister who can read someone's body language and voice well enough to know if they're lying or not. Basically, she's a human lie detector test.
My lord, you gave your word to the witch.
But the Baron has ways of keeping his hands clean while a supposed accident could still happen to Paul and Jessica.
Well, like an accident?
Accident, stick up. He could choke on a chicken wing.
Jason Momoa plays Duncan Idaho, the highly trained swordmaster for House Atreides. Here, Duncan finally returns from his advanced mission. Duncan had traveled ahead early to Arrakis to meet with the Fremen as an example of the character of House Atreides. As Duncan discovered, the Fremen are fierce fighters, and they live in numerous cave communities called Sieches.
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 Sietch.
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 Sieches. With Duncan is Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem, a Naib of the Fremen, one of the leaders of these Sieches. Stilgar has lived in a world where the noble family governing Arrakis has always oppressed his people, so he is immediately, and rightly so, apprehensive of House Atreides. It's only when Duke Leto shows Stilgar the Atreides way, that the Atreides give their undying loyalty to their subjects, that Stilgar finally shows his appreciation in the best way possible. On Arrakis, it's fine to spit as a sign of respect, but when I do it, suddenly I have to meet with HR. Anyways, as Stilgar leaves to return to his siege, he recognizes the signs of the Lisan al-Gaib in Paul, another instance of the Missionaria Protectiva at work. Paul, Duke Leto, and Gurney then inspect their spice harvesting operations, and they meet with the planet ecologist, Dr. Liet Kynes. She acts as the judge of the change, an administrative position appointed by the Emperor to manage the transition of Arrakis from the Harkonnens to the Atreides. But Dr. Kynes may be more than just an agent for the Emperor.
Are you Fremen?
I am accepted in both siege and village.
She too sees signs of the Lisan al-Gaib in Paul, recognizing that Paul is already down with the latest Fremen drip, wearing his stillsuit in the desert fashion.
Seem the right way.
Out in the desert, a large spice harvester extracts the spice from the surface of the dunes. But you know what's bigger than a harvester? A gigantic worm.
Is that a worm?
Big one.
As Dr. Kynes explains, the giant sandworms of Arrakis are attracted to rhythmic vibrations and attack anything within their territory. Carryalls are transport ships meant to lift a spice harvester away from an enraged worm. But in this case, the carryall is damaged, or possibly even sabotaged, leaving the harvester stranded on the dangerous sand below. Duke Leto, therefore, willingly risks his life to rescue the spice miners, which doesn't go unnoticed by Dr. Kynes.
Besides, we got a full load of spice. We can't just leave it.
Damn the spice! I want every man off that crawler now!
And it is here that Paul finally walks out on the desert sands of Arrakis. He is quickly enveloped in a cloud of spice, which activates his budding prescient abilities. But before he gets too enticed in the spice, he'll need to get off the sand before he becomes food for Shai Hulud. Gurney rescues Paul just in time for the two of them to see just how massive a sandworm actually is, swallowing this spice harvester entirely whole. Now, Paul's visions from the spice are really freaking him out. He remembers seeing the literal girl of his dreams, Chani, and they begin to kiss. Psych, she stabs him! Paul next also tells his mother about his visions, showing him his as of yet unborn baby sister, Alia. Will we see more of Alia in Dune Part 2?
You can't know that.
We jump to the planet Seleucus Secundus, the Emperor's prison planet where he keeps his Imperial army of Sardaukar shock troops. Piter de Vries, the Mentat for House Harkonnen, finishes brokering the deal that will provide 3 battalions of the Emperor's Sardaukar to reinforce the Harkonnens. Now in the book, the Sardaukar actually disguise themselves as Harkonnen soldiers. Remember, the Emperor wants to remove House Atreides, but cannot do so outright or risk the chaos of all-out war among all of the noble houses. By backing the Harkonnens, the extermination of the Atreides will just look like normal rival house warfare. With the ongoing pressures of harvesting enough spice, Duke Leto feels the Harkonnens and the Emperor both closing in. He knows time is short, too short to possibly ally with the Fremen and prepare for the inevitable Harkonnen attack. Leto fears for the life of his son and asks Jessica if she'll do whatever it takes to protect Paul. But Leto knows that Jessica's loyalties aren't just to House Atreides. As a mother, Jessica will absolutely protect their son, but Duke Leto realizes he may need to rely on the shadowy methods of the Bene Gesserit themselves to ensure Paul's survival.
Why are you having these thoughts?
I thought we'd have more time.
When the Harkonnens finally launch their attack on the Atreides, they're brutal!
They're brutal!
It turns out that Dr. Yue, the house physician for the Atreides, is a traitor.
Why is Dr. Yue here?
After Dr. Yue disables the house shields, the Harkonnens unleash a massive assault force onto the planet. But Dr. Yue isn't just a simple Harkonnen pawn. The Harkonnens have captured and tortured his wife, and Dr. Yue wants his revenge. He plans to deliver Duke Leto to the Baron Harkonnen in exchange for his wife. So Dr. Yue conceals a poison gas tooth in Leto's mouth so that when the doomed Duke takes his final breath, he can also kill the Baron. Yue tells Duke Leto for this one final act, in return, Yue will ensure Paul and Jessica's safety. As the Harkonnen attack rages outside, Sardaukar shock troops join the fray and decimate the Atreides house guard. And we see Gurney Halleck for the last time as he leads a valiant charge against a mass of Harkonnen soldiers.
With me! With me!
We'll see just exactly what happens to him in Part 2.
You young pup.
Now in the book, one of the major plot points that couldn't fit into the runtime of Dune Part 1 is the treason of Dr. Wellington Yue. Dr. Yue is a Suk doctor, a highly trained medical professional who is conditioned to never take a human life. Suk doctor conditioning is so trusted, they are considered safe enough to administer medical aid to members of the noble houses, even to the Emperor himself.
And the only prescription is more cowbell.
However, Piter de Vries, the Harkonnen Mentat, discovered a way to break Dr. Yue's conditioning with the capture and torture of Yue's wife. Throughout the first part of the book, the Atreides are aware that there is a traitor among them, but readers quickly learn that it is actually Dr. Yue. The Harkonnens throw the Atreides off the scent the whole time though, confusing Duke Leto and Thufir to suspect even the Lady Jessica herself. Paul and Jessica are drugged and taken captive on a Harkonnen ornithopter so they can be sandworm food out in the desert. But Paul uses his Bene Gesserit skill that Jessica taught him to overpower the Harkonnen stooges.
Your pitch was too forced.
Luckily, Dr. Yue's final act of redemption leaves Paul and Jessica with a Frem kit to survive in the desert, as well as Duke Leto's ducal ring for Paul. As Paul and Jessica take shelter in a Fremen still tent, Duke Leto remains captive back in the Arrakeen Keep. He stares at the bullhead mounted in the banquet hall, the same bull that killed his father, and it reminds Leto of the consequences of playing such a dangerous game. The Baron Harkonnen, believing he has destroyed House Atreides entirely, gloats over his paralyzed rival. But with his dying breath, Leto bites down on the tooth and kills nearly everyone in the room with the poison gas. Unfortunately, the Baron still survives, but he is severely weakened by the attack. Paul discovers his father's ring in the Frem kit, knowing that his father is now dead. He doesn't have any time to mourn, however, as he realizes the weight of his new life ahead of him. As he inhales the spice that has gotten into the tent, his prescient sight activates and floods his mind with visions of possible futures. He sees himself leading the Fremen in a terrifying war across the universe, a war of untold levels of death and destruction, all in the name of House Atreides. It's here that Paul realizes his abilities are the product of the Bene Gesserit breeding program, that he is just a mere tool to be used, even in part by his own mother.
You did this to me! You Bene Gesserit made me a freak!
After the visions pass, Paul finally has a moment to grieve his father's death. Paul and Jessica emerge from their still tent and Paul spots a tiny desert mouse known as Muad'Dib. This little guy is a great nod to the book because at this point in the story, it's the beginning of the second part, titled Muad'Dib. This mouse teaches important lessons to those who wish to adapt and survive in the desert, and it is at this point in Paul's journey where he begins to change into a desert creature. Duncan Idaho, along with Dr. Kynes, then rescues Paul and Jessica. They retreat to an ancient ecological testing station from the early days of terraformation efforts of Arrakis. Paul realizes here that Dr. Kynes may have more in common with the Fremen than she originally led on. Earlier in the movie, Paul asks about the palm trees in Arrakeen, to which the gardener replies,
Old dream.
Now, Paul shows Dr. Kynes he understands her dream of turning Arrakis from a desert wasteland into a lush paradise. Also, by using the prophecy of the Lisan al-Gaib from the Bene Gesserit's Missionaria Protectiva, Paul claims he can be the promised leader the Fremen need. Dr. Kynes finally accepts Paul as an ally and promises to help expose the Emperor's plot against the Atreides. Here, we learn that Dr. Kynes is actually Fremen.
I'm Fremen.
In the book, House Atreides only knows Dr. Kynes as an ecologist and as the judge of the change. Duke Leto believes Kynes has gone native, noting Kynes' blue eyes and his ability to command the Fremen. The Atreides also learn that the Fremen speak of a mysterious leader known as Liet. It's later that Dr. Kynes reveals he is in fact Liet, and that he keeps tabs on the workings of the Imperium as he poses as the judge of the change.
I know you walk in two worlds that are known by many names.
Dr. Kynes inherited his position as ecologist, or in the ancient term, planetologist, from his father, Pardo Kynes. Pardo was originally a planetologist who dreamed of terraforming Arrakis into a much more lush and habitable planet. Pardo saw the value of the Fremen as a working force to help slowly change the planet over time. He married a Fremen woman, and she gave birth to Liet, who took over managing the long-term terraforming designs of his father. Now, just as Paul proves to Dr. Kynes that he is a leader worth following, the Sardaukar show up and attack the Fremen hideout. Paul, Jessica, and Kynes escape as Duncan stays behind to fend off the Sardaukar. It takes over 19 Sardaukar to finally kill Duncan, and I gotta say, I really hate to see him go out like that. But we'll just have to wait and see what the future holds. Psst, go read Dune Messiah. Paul and Jessica then flee in an ornithopter to find safety with more of the Fremen. A fleet of Harkonnen ornithopters finds them and chases them into one of the giant sandstorms of Arrakis, and the Harkonnens then just assume the storm killed them.
We chase them into a Coriolis storm. Nothing survives such a storm.
As Paul fights the controls of the ornithopter and navigates the sandstorm, his prescient vision kicks in and shows an unknown friend in his future. And this part of the movie features what is probably the most important lesson from Dune's author, Frank Herbert. We hear a Fremen tell Paul, the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience, a process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it. Paul then releases the controls. He gives into the flow to let everything, the sandstorm, nature, fate itself, take them as they will. Back in the now Harkonnen-controlled Arrakeen, the injured Baron Harkonnen recovers in his black goo bath. Now that the Harkonnens have reclaimed Arrakis, the Beast Raban must squeeze Arrakis for all it's worth. The Harkonnen invasion cost them a lot of spice from their secret stockpiles, after all.
Squeeze hard.
Yes, Uncle.
Paul and Jessica crash into the desert wasteland and quickly retreat to a rocky outcropping before the crash can summon a worm. They change into their still suits, transforming themselves further into creatures of the desert. Paul's visions are now becoming more frequent. He sees his friend Duncan with the Fremen. He sees the same mysterious girl as before. He even sees his new friend, all teaching him ways to survive in the deep desert. But also out here in the deep desert, we find the largest of the monstrous sandworms, and before Paul and Jessica can find the Fremen, they are attacked by Shai Hulud. A friend's thumper fortunately calls the worm away, but Paul and Jessica may be in greater danger now that they've happened upon a group of Fremen. Paul recognizes Stilgar from before, and hopes that the Fremen will give them refuge. But the desert is a dangerous place, and many of the Fremen sees two off-worlders as a pair of human Capri Suns.
What wealth can you offer beyond the water in your flesh?
Stilgar still thinks Paul may in fact be the Lisan al-Gaib, so he decides to help Paul, but to kill Jessica. Except Jessica is a weirding woman, trained in the weirding way of the Bene Gesserit, and she disarms Stilgar with ease.
Why didn't you say you were a weirding woman?
Conversation ran short.
With a knife to his throat, Stilgar wisely changes his mind and agrees to give both Paul and Jessica sanctuary. At the same time, Paul finally meets the girl of his dreams, Chani, yet she sees him as nothing more than a little boy and is indifferent. Hey dude, game recognized game. But Jamis, a ferocious fighter in his own right, challenges Stilgar's decision to protect Paul and Jessica. Jamis invokes the Amtal. The Amtal rule is the idea to test an object to its limits, usually to its own destruction, and in the case of the Fremen, this means a duel to the death. Paul accepts Jamis's challenge to defend his mother.
I accept her, champion.
Paul does recognize Jamis as his friend from his visions, but now new visions show Jamis killing Paul during this duel. Paul has now reached a nexus point of potential futures, a point in time that could change the terrifying future he saw earlier. As the sun rises, Paul and Jamis fight with Fremen crysknives, blades carved from the teeth of the giant sandworms. Paul honors his fallen swordmaster teacher Duncan with his traditional salute. Paul must rely on a mixture of his Bene Gesserit training with his mother and his weapons training from Duncan and Gurney. In the desert, however, no one fights with shields, and Paul realizes he must actually kill Jamis for this duel to end.
Is he toying with him?
No, Paul has never killed a man.
Paul's visions flash through his mind. Either he dies in this fight, or he survives and unlocks his terrifying future. Paul has no choice but to best Jamis, and he holds his friend's hand as he dies. Nothing like proving your friendship by stabbing your friend in the back. As Paul and Jessica leave with the Fremen into the desert wasteland, Paul sees a sandworm in the distance. But a Fremen rides atop this sandworm, harnessing the power of this giant beast to travel across the desert. This is the desert power Duke Leto explained to his son. This is the desert power that Paul can use to survive in this strange world. Chani turns to Paul and says, "This is only the beginning," and we see a flash of Paul's visions coming true. And we last see Jessica as her expression changes, making us wonder what plans could she herself have for the Fremen. And there you have it, folks. That's a full recap of Dune Part 1. I hopefully gave you everything you need to know to be ready for Dune Part 2. We'll just have to wait and see what Paul's visions of the future truly hold. And in the meantime, try to read the book if you haven't already. It will definitely enhance your experience as you watch these films. If you have any remaining questions though, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to explain anything I might have missed or might have been confusing about. But tell us, what was your favorite part of Dune Part 1? What are you looking forward to most in Dune Part 2? I'm very excited for Alia. Thank you so much for watching, and for any and all spicy Dune news, we've got you covered over on Nerdist.com.